It's taken me a long while to get to the very end, but I'm finally going to be reviewing the final book in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, Blood Communion. I believe I started these reviews and reading these books when I started my YouTube channel, which I think has been about 4 years now, so it's kind of the end of a certain era of my channel to be wrapping up, although I will be doing a ranking, I think, of the Chronicles at some point, but I want to maybe reread a couple of books before I get onto that. As far as this book goes, though, I will say before I get into it that I really enjoyed this one, and I think it's an excellent ending to the Vampire Chronicles series. Part 1, Summary. Blood Communion is the final novel in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles series, and it focuses on the story of Lestat as he is now settling into his role as the leader of the vampires, trying to bring the tribe of vampires together under a common law. Unfortunately, his attempts are thwarted not just by inner conflicts, but by Roshamandes, who returns seeking revenge on Lestat. Roshamandes may have been happy to live in resentment on his own until his protege and lover, Benedict, returns to Lestat and offers himself up for execution, which Lestat reluctantly agrees to. Roshamandes believes that Lestat was fully responsible for this and decides to take revenge by kidnapping and seemingly destroying many of Lestat's closest vampire companions. As his own tribe turns against him, Lestat realises that he must confront and defeat Roshamandes once and for all, potentially risking his own life in the process. Part 2. The Last Chronicle. Overall, I loved this book and thought it was a fantastic conclusion to the Vampire Chronicles series. And I wonder if Rice felt this herself, because it certainly feels like a final book. The fact that she decided in this one to just really focus on the central core vampire cast, to not include anything in terms of mythology all that much, and the Replomoids all that much, just focusing on this inner conflict as the vampires deal with each other and see if they can finally work out a way to live in the modern world and also in the future together. I think that given that this turned out to be the last book in the Chronicles, this works really well, this idea. The feud between Roshamandes and Lestat has been building slowly over the past 2 books and hasn't really had a proper resolution, and so it's great that things finally come to a head in this one. Like the Realms of Atlantis, it also has a happy ending, but unlike the Realms of Atlantis, it does create a lot of tension, leaving you guessing whether or not it really will be a happy ending. When Roche kidnaps Gabrielle and then her ashes come back the next day, I genuinely did think that Rice had gone there and killed Gabrielle, because I know that Rice doesn't really like Gabrielle as a character, so I thought, if she's going to kill one, she's going to kill Gabrielle. And so it really did leave me thinking, maybe she's done that. And also, when Lestat went to face Roshamandes, I did wonder for a moment or two there whether Lestat really would sacrifice himself, and that would be the kind of bittersweet ending that we would get with the series. Part 3. Sidelined Replomoids. Okay, so I know I said that it was a good decision for Rice to sideline the Replomoids a few moments ago, but now I'm going to say that maybe she shouldn't have, because the Replomoids really were set up in the previous book, I felt, with lots of interesting questions around them. How exactly are they going to fit into this new world? What are their plans exactly, for the future? Are they going to try and recreate Atlantis? How do they see themselves fitting in with human society? All of this stuff. And how do they fit in with the vampires too? Now, I get why Rice decided to sideline this stuff. Atlantis maybe was a polarizing book, and I think she really did just want to focus on the vampires, and as I said, if we just focus on this book as the final book, it was the right decision. But not thinking about it in that way, it did sort of make thematic sense to go into detail about the Replomoids a little bit more, because the final 3 books really do make up a trilogy, and it just seems like it works to have a little bit more of them, because that's kind of what the previous 2 books set up. And so just to sort of lose them and not to really answer any of these questions is a bit of a letdown for me. That being said, maybe you could see Blood Communion as a kind of epilogue rather than a book, in the sense that, the vampires were freed from Armel, the Replomoids ultimately just served the purpose of freeing the vampires from Armel, and so really those questions don't matter and don't need to be answered. And we deal with that in Atlantis, and so now is the time with this epilogue novel to just focus on the vampires and their possible future. I'm willing to accept that as an ending to the trilogy, but just because I enjoyed the Replomoids so much, I wish that there was just a little bit more of them. Part 4. Cold Feet. So the one real criticism I have of this novel is that Rice had an opportunity to do something quite bold and quite dark, and she chickened out at the last minute. And this, of course, is to do with the deaths of Gabrielle, Louis, and Marius. So as I said before, when Gabrielle died, I actually thought that Rice had killed Gabrielle, because I know she doesn't like Gabrielle. But when it happened the next time to Louis, I was thinking, is she really going to kill Louis off? I wasn't sure, but I just didn't think so. Partly because the death was just a little bit too quick, a little bit too easy. I was like, there's no way you're going to kill Louis off in this way. I could see you doing it to Gabrielle, but not to Louis. And then when Marius as well, I was like, no way. And so, in a way, by ramping up the tension, she sort of got rid of it, because I just didn't believe that she would kill these characters. And lo and behold, she didn't. It seems that Rice is just a little bit too precious with these vampires sometimes. Ever since she killed Armand and then brought him back, she doesn't really kill main vampires off, with the exception of Quinn and I suppose Mona, although they aren't central in the way that those other vampires are. And it's a shame, because I think that, given that Rice obviously made this choice to create drama in this way, I think actually it would have been more powerful to end the Vampire Chronicles with losing those three characters. One thing that Lestat has always done, and this is actually mentioned in the story as well, is that he does make terrible decisions, and he doesn't really learn from them. You know, he made Claudia into a vampire in order to keep Louis, and that was a terrible decision that led to a lot of pain and suffering for most of Louis's vampiric life, and even his own to a point. He makes these decisions all the time, and so to have his refusal to deal with Roshamandes, despite the fact that everyone has been warning him that he should, people who know better than him, actually to have him suffer a real cost of that, I think would have been way more impactful for the ending of the story. Yeah, it would have been depressing and miserable, but I think it would have created for more pathos in the end if Lestat did survive himself to then deal with the fallout of this. And it would also motivate him maybe to make a much better future for the vampires. The ending that we get is a little bit schmaltzy, and while I do like that in a way because I like these characters, and so from a personal point of view, I obviously don't want them to die, but from a narrative point of view, I think it would have made for a more impactful ending in terms of Lestat's character, in terms of the overall thematic way that the Vampire Chronicles is done. I think it would have been more impactful to have killed them, or at least killed one or two of them. Part 5, a focus on the core. And while we're talking about the vampires, I've skirted around this a little bit, but I want to just focus on a little bit more now, is the fact that finally, in these 3 books, we finally just get Rice focusing on that main core cast of vampires. Yes, Rose and Victor are still there, being completely irrelevant, but mostly it is that original core cast of vampires. Even Pandora gets a fair bit of time in this one, where she's basically been ignored ever since her own narrated book. Gabrielle and Lestat also have some great moments, although again, I did think that a lot of that came about after her capture and when she gets returned. I think it would have been great for Rice to have included a little bit more from Gabrielle and Lestat before her kidnapping. Again, I think if she'd have done that, it might have even made her kidnapping more compelling, because usually if a writer is going to, set up a death, they will then give some major characterization just before. Either something good will happen, or just an important conversation, and then obviously the person dies, and it's just a little bit more compelling. So I think still there could have been more, but on the whole, I liked the fact that Gabrielle on the start had some real resolution to to a character arc that began in the Prince Lestat and really got abandoned after that book. It's great to see that stuff finally getting resolved. Louis and Lestat also have some of their best moments throughout the whole series here as well. And I love the stuff between Armand and Lestat when Armand thinks that Marius has died and there is just complete antagonism between these two. Armand outright commanding Lestat to kill the Replomoids. All of that stuff I think is excellent, caused a great amount of tension. And again, I did wonder for a moment whether Armand and Lestat would come to a head in this one. They don't, and it makes sense that they don't ultimately, given where things go. But it was a great character moment for both of them. If the novels had gone further, I sometimes wonder if Armand would have just become an ultimate antagonist to Lestat, if he just broke free of the tribe, tried to kill the Replomoids. I could imagine him certainly doing that, and that would definitely be a direction that I think the novels could have gone in had they continued. The newer vampire characters also have less space here, which I am all for. Probably my most irritating thing about the Vampire Chronicles is, I think it's called Victor. Lestat's son character, I just think that decision was so weird and bizarre. And Rose, I actually quite liked a little bit her setup story in Prince Lestat, but she goes nowhere, and so there's just no point to really have these two characters. They are really just surrogates for Mona and Quinn, and while I don't care for Mona, it would have been great to have just had Quinn in these stories. One thing that I do like, though, I think it's in this one, it might be Atlantis. I read these two one after the other, so they are a bit together in my mind, but Rice does suggest that while Mona, I think she was seen to die, Quinn wasn't. And so in my head canon, I'm just going to imagine that Quinn is somewhere mourning Mona's death, but he'll come back to the fold eventually and forget Mona, as everyone should, because she's such a terrible character. But I like that. I like that Rice sort of teased and left that open. But ultimately, it was nice that when it comes to the new vampires, they were definitely on the back foot, and we were focusing on the more important core vampires, which is what you want in a final book in a series that is this long. Part 6, Conclusion. The Vampire Chronicles is a difficult series. You know, you begin with the gothic, sort of insular, really depressing Interview with the Vampire, then Lestat emerges as this flamboyant, gothic, ridiculous persona for a few books. Then we get the middle books, which are strange and different, the different tales from different vampires, the crossover novels, some really bad books, I have to say, or at least not very good ones, but then she turns it around with these final 3. I wasn't that sold on Prince Lestat, but it did set up 2 great final books in my view, and I'm glad that I carried on with the series to the end, and I'm looking forward to reading them maybe all, at least one more time, just to consolidate my thoughts on them. So the fact that, having read them all now, I want to try them again is at least a good thing. Maybe not Blood Canticle. I might skip Blood Canticle. I don't know if I need to read that one again. But maybe the others I can give them all a second chance. Overall though, Blood Communion, excellent story, slimmed down, focusing on this tension with the vampires, bringing back a lot of the main characters and actually putting them into focus, tension in the plot, and overall just a satisfying ending to the Chronicles. If you've read the Vampire Chronicles series, do let me know down in the comments what you think of it, and what do you think of these final 3 books, because again, it's something that I think people are quite divided on. Some people really do see them as a fitting conclusion to the series, but others seem to dislike them, especially the previous book. But I think this one works really well as a conclusion. Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are. And that's it for this video. Take care everyone. Ta-ra!